Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another edition of Gate 7 International. I'm Kostas Llanos, joined by star presenter Labros Sirmos, and today is an amazing day as we are joined by the Athletics' one and only Oliver Kay. Oliver, how are you, man?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely, we're very happy to have you. Labro, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. The sun is shining in Brussels, which is very rare these days, every day, I should say. So I'm happy. I can't be more happy with that. So all good.
Well, speaking about happiness, we're supposed to have a derby on Sunday against Panathinaikos, the eternal rivals, a game that could take the title away from them if Olympiacos win. But guess what? The game might be postponed as Panathinaikos at this time of recording, which is Saturday, 11 past 12 p.m. Central Eastern Time. Panathinaikos have stated that they have had over 20 cases of COVID-19, mostly by players, so the game might be postponed. That's a blast from the past, isn't it, Labro?
Yeah, it was. We were talking about it before we went on air. How it's like you haven't heard a story about a game being delayed via COVID in so long, and the regulations nowadays, if you get COVID, I don't even think you're supposed to quarantine anymore. So I don't know how this works, and if they can even delay it legally because there's no longer measures. I don't know. We'll see. But it is the game. Although Olympiakos' season is basically over, all intents and purposes, they can steal the title from Panathinaikos in a closed door game. So let's see. Let's see how it goes and develops. And I'll be in Athens next week. So if it's delayed, maybe I'll get to be in the stadium for it. So
That'd
yeah.
be amazing, man. That'd be amazing. I mean, I was at the stadium in the last Karaiskaki game against Panathinaikos. It was quite a game, a goalless draw, entertaining goalless draw, and I covered it. I made my live commentary debut with Costa Levoyani, and it was quite a special night for me because that's the night I met Oliver. He covered the game for the Athletic. He had a lovely interview with Sokratis Papastathopoulos after the game, and that is where we met Oliver. And I gotta ask, like, I mean, you've covered a lot of games throughout your career, but I mean, this one is special. I mean, it was intense. There were fireworks. The fans were going crazy. We had owners on the touchline. We had VAR drama. How did you find that game, and how does it compare to all the big games you have covered live?
Well, thank you. We're running this series on the Athletic called Derby Days, where we've been going to some of the biggest rivalries, whether they're sort of inner city rivalries like Panathinaikos, Olympiacos, or whether it's sort of big cultural rivalries like Liverpool, Manchester United, and Barcelona, Real Madrid. Rangers Celtic obviously is very, very fierce. So we've been doing all these matches in Turkey, in Serbia, in Hungary, in the Netherlands, and it was my wish to do the Derby of the Eternal Enemies. I put my hand up for that one straight away, and God, it's intense, isn't it? I mean, that was when I consider that two things. One, that it was three things. One, that it was a 0-0. Two, that nothing was going to be decided in that game. Both teams were already going through to the playoffs. And three, there's no away fans in the ground, which has been a case since 2004, is it?
No, actually, I think that's 2006.
2006.
No, 2005, late 2005, I think.
Okay. Well, so despite these things, and 33,000 people in the ground, it's not a huge crowd. God, it was so loud. It was so much louder than Old Trafford is 75,000. The Emirates is 60,000 or something like that. Anfield 55,000. That's the loudest ground I've heard this season. It was so loud, despite it being 0-0. I mean, it wasn't funny for you guys, but it was funny in a way for me as a neutral. The reaction when Vrusai went through in stoppage time, scored the goal, and the crowd went ballistic. Even the press box, there was a guy in the press box who was like jumping on his desk. That doesn't happen in England. And then the VAR, it was, and then Marinakis walking onto the pitch and having a go at or walking onto the touchline and having a go at the referee and the fourth official. It's Greek football is mad, isn't it? It's we always think in the Premier League, oh, it's drama, it's storylines, it's controversy, soap opera. But in terms of drama and, just controversy, this endless soap opera and incidents and it's Greek football seems to be in a world of its own. And and when you talk about the COVID sort of virus sweeping Panathinaikos, how is Marinakis, the great sort of conspiracy theorist, the great paranoiac? So how are he and how are Olympiacos going to react to that? They'll be demanding the points, won't they? Insisting that this is some kind of conspiracy, and insisting it's immoral. I mean, look, everything I know about Greek football and about Marinakis tells me this is just going to be yet another crazy polemic.
Yeah, just wait. I don't know how much you followed these club statements that come out almost after every derby. And I think in Greek, and as Greeks, it seems more neutral to us, but I love having it translated and sent to a friend. And they're like, what? Like, what are these references? And like, it's just absurd, It's so ridiculous with the referees, the opposing team, the conspiracies against us. So I remember reading your article, and I think you may have spoken with Themis Kesaris from Sport 24, and he said,
yes,
the presidents and the conspiracies are almost bigger than the game, which is something. It's so disappointing, because the atmosphere, the fans, the team, the big fights all together is what we really want to aim for. But it all comes back to the conspiracies and who controls the refs and what is going on with that sort of thing, the club statements attacking one another. It kind of overcasts the amazing environment. I don't know.
Themis Kesaris said to me, I was saying, look, what should I expect? And he talked about noise, and he said, I'm sort of roughly quoting, whatever happens in the game, it will end up being, there will end up being a sort of controversy, a war of words. It won't be remembered as the derby of such and such a goal. It will be remembered as the derby of a red card, a penalty, a foul, offside. It's always got to come back to the controversy, and it did. I mean, it was a 0-0. I mean, Olympiacos were much the better team on the night. Looked much more like winning. I felt. I mean, I haven't even been able to see a replay of it in the 2 months since, because when I was writing the article, it seemed impossible to find anything on the internet. That's something else Greek football needs to look at. But yeah, the statement that Marinakis came out with that night was wild. It was the referees surgically control the games, and I think, well, to me that looked offside. I don't know whether I don't know whether it was, but to me it didn't. I didn't feel like I was looking, watching a game which was a corrupt game or a corrupt championship, as he said. I wonder what do fans make of it? Do fans in Greece, do they leap on and get behind the the owners when they're saying things, because it is so tribal, isn't it? So I mean, do the fans love to hear this, or do they sometimes kind of roll their eyes and think, God, not again? Let's just take this one on the chin.
Well, I think go ahead, Question.
I mean, traditionally, I wrote a tweet the other day about the constant complaining and moaning in the Premier League that we see every week from various teams and some usual suspects from the Premier League. It's really starting to remind me the discourse from when I was a child in Greece. Every week I would hear complaints about the referees and everything. And this now I feel like it has evolved, because now I hear owners talking the same way that fans used to talk when I was a kid back in the early to late 2000s. So it's like you said, it's tribal. I mean, there are a lot of fans that will back the owner, no matter who the owner is, right? We're talking about all owners from all across football. But there are also fans who will oppose the owner and say, hey, no, you need to make signings. You need to get us a new manager. You need to build us a new stadium. But then again, Greek football, well, the Greek football is not the Premier League. It's a completely different beast, completely different animal. There is a lot of backstage actions. There's a lot of behind the scenes dirt. We have seen a lot of questionable refereeing throughout the season. Uh, there's more than meets the eye over there. But when it comes to the fans, like you said, it's tribal. You got the one side that will back the owner no matter what, and there's the other side that will be there are the neutrals as well, and there are also the ones who will say, listen, man, no, you just need to get us players. That's what you need to do. You need to rebuild the team.
No, and
because
building
this
off
way
of
you
that,
also beat the referees. Is what they say.
I would build off of that as well with Costa. There are fans, but I think a lot of fans are a bit tired of it. And in the same season, if you lose to a Nantes team that's going to be relegated maybe in France, like 3-1, 3-0, and then you lose to Karabag, almost 3-0. You lose to, who was it? Freiburg came in and beat us, I think, 3 or 4-0 in the first half, and then coasted the rest of the game. And you think to yourself, well, are the referees aren't the problem in Europe, and the team is very underperforming. It could barely beat Apollon Limassol. It had to go to penalties with Slovan Bratislava. So
Slovan.
It's the logical. I think the logical fan here looks and says, well, you signed 40 players. You never replaced your technical director.
They did. They brought
they
Jose
did
Miguel.
sort of, but you know what I mean. From a logical point of view, you look and you say you have 4 or 5 different managers. Something stinks more than just the referees. Like something else is going on here, and you have the whole Marcelo debacle, and then you have James Rodriguez debacle. He was still on the team when you were there.
Yes.
Yeah, he didn't play that game.
play.
I think he may have been
injured.
It was not surprising to me that things weren't working out. It's the impression I had was that he was like a statement signing, as indeed he had been at Everton, really,
and Marcelo
as well.
All of them failed.
It just looked. I mean, I watching that game. I mean, Sergi Canos, who was at Brentford, and has been a good player at Brentford in the Championship. Maybe less involved when they last season in the Premier League, but good player. And he seemed to, I thought, well, could he be one of the stars? He had a really poor game in that particular game, and it just struck me as a very difficult, dysfunctional environment to play in.
So that's
the thing you're describing with Marinakis and signing so many players and sacking so many managers. It sounds very similar to what has been a situation at Nottingham Forest. He's stuck with his manager Steve Cooper this season, which I'm really glad he has done. But I think it must go against every instinct he has, because he just seems like a guy who, as the owner, needs to interfere, needs to make signings, make changes all the time. And I think the one reason why Nottingham Forest still have a chance of staying up, well, the one reason they got promoted was appointing Steve Cooper last season, and the one reason they've still got a chance of staying up, I think, is also Steve Cooper. I think he's done a very good job at what is no doubt another dysfunctional club under Marinakis' ownership.
It just goes back to who's making the decisions and what exactly is occurring. And another element that I don't know if you touched a bit on in your story, I don't remember. I read it when it came out, almost the first day I clicked on it. It's a great read. But is the media landscape in Greece is kind of controlled by the clubs as well? Each club has a newspaper. We don't have an athletic who will write things with data analysis and kind of dig into behind the scenes. So the narratives are formed by the media as well around the club's narratives, and no one really tries to pull the curtain back. I don't know if you saw, but Greece was rated the worst media freedom country in all of Europe, behind a lot of countries. So it's a question also about is there really criticism domestically? Are there people kind of saying, well, why'd you sign Vrsaljko if he has no cartilage in his knee? What's going on there? So it's a problem there. And the fan perspective, you kind of can win over with the newspapers. But there in the UK, I think if he had fired Cooper, the fans would have turned on him himself, if that makes sense. Like the fans really seem to back Steve Cooper. So
yeah. It's not like that at every club, and I think when he's sacked managers in the past at Forest, I think it's generally been because he's made the wrong appointment, or because the things weren't working out because the club was a mess, and then he sort of finally got an appointment right with Cooper, and he's probably had to resist the urge to change after when they've been on a losing run. But it's to me, I find it really. I mean, just coming at it from the outside, I knew that Marinakis was had this big media empire. I didn't realise that Alafouzos
is Panathinaikos owner. Yes,
he does too.
and that he also had this media empire. Look, I know. I mean, I find it really infuriating in the UK that you write something praising any club, Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal. Fans of the other club will accuse you of being in the pocket or even on the payroll of that club, which is just probably the biggest insult you can give to a journalist. The amount of ludicrous tribalism and bias among fans on Twitter, and they're accusing you of bias because you don't share their biased view of their club. And yet I know that there's no media organisation, no media outlet that I would say is strongly affiliated with any single club. I really mean that in the Premier League. I think you can look at maybe one or two of the papers in Scotland, and I think Scotland is quite comparable to Greece in terms of the absolute sort of madness and antagonism of their football culture. Scotland, there have always been accusations about certain newspapers, but it's sometimes you'll have a journalist who will be so embedded in one club that that they reflect the club's position a lot of the time. They reflect the club's view and are quite embedded in that club. But if a colleague gets a story about that club and it's really negative, absolutely the media organisation will run it. It's just obvious. So I don't think that kind of institutional media bias could ever be allowed in England. But in Greece, it's that is just part of the culture. It's meant to be biased. I looked at the new papers on the newsstand on the next day, and one of them was sort of had a heroic looking Panathinaikos players, and the other had this sort of quite deceptive looking freeze frame of the offside decision, and I didn't understand the words on the front, but it just seemed like that controversy was always going to be manufactured, whether it was real or not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is a whole discussion about the media in Greece. I mean, you mentioned that this sort of bias wouldn't be allowed in England, but we don't see it in football. Although we do see a lot of pundits, a lot of Manchester United legends, a lot of Liverpool legends, Arsenal legends, who of course are going to be backing their teams during the post-match analysis. Of course, they're going to back. Some of them are going to back the manager moaning about a penalty or an offside or VAR. But of course, it is another story when it comes to politics. I mean, because in England there are a lot of newspapers and a lot of channels who obviously have a political agenda. Obviously, this is obviously Olympiacos are out now though of the league title. They're out of the cup. The only thing they're thinking about right now is rebuilding. The game against Panathinaikos is nothing but a formality. I suppose they want to to take
block.
away the title from them.
They would love to block
I'd
it.
like to think that there's still some, football ego over there, a lot of pride saying, yeah, we're out of the whole thing, but we're not finishing fourth. And so now what they're doing now, Olympiacos, they're rebuilding and they're looking for a new manager. Before we go to the next managers, to the next potential managers, I got to ask you this question. Do you think Nottingham Forest are going to survive? Are they going to avoid relegation?
I think it's. I look at Forest, Leicester, Everton, Leeds. It feels to me like it's two of those four. I would give Leicester the best chance of staying up just on the basis of their recent results, recent performances, fairly positive impact of the managerial change, and I just think they have a bit more quality. So in which case we'd be looking at two from the other three, and I would say Villa. Sorry, not Villa. Apologies, Villa. You're doing very well. Forest, Leeds, Everton. I mean, they all look like they're going down, and one of them's going to stay up by perhaps getting a win and a draw. Interesting what Leeds have done with appointing Sam Allardyce. It's the kind of thing I could have imagined Marinakis doing in desperation. Have Leeds got the players to play the way Allardyce will want to play? I don't know if they have. Have Everton have really tough fixtures? Forest, I think they'll beat Southampton. That's my prediction. I think that this weekend, possibly proved wrong by the time people listen to this, but I think that's their big chance. Yeah. And if they do that they will have a decent chance. So, but it's going to be really tough. If I could see it coming down to goal difference and being incredibly tense on the last day. So I wouldn't want to make any predictions. Just one thing I was going to say, just which I've not managed to mention. It's probably backtracking a bit, but I was just when I went to that game at Olympiacos the other week. The other thing that struck me, and it's a familiar thing because I've had it when I've gone to matches in Scotland, and when I've had good matches in Portugal to a lesser extent, but the Netherlands as well. And this used to be 20. If I think back 20 years ago, the first time I went to Olympiacos was for a UEFA Cup game against Liverpool in 2000, and they had they had players who were going to be in the Greek Euros winning team. They had players like Giovanni and Djordjevic. It was a really strong squad. You'd go to, it felt like there was, the Greek league, the Turkish league, as well. They would always have good players. They would always still have the best players in Greece, and Greece had good players at that time. And to me, it's just. I'm not being critical of Greek football when I say I'm disappointed for Greek football that A, they're not producing as many top class players, and B, it just feels, despite the sort of financial strength that remains of the big clubs, it just feels like the quality is so relatively low. I was looking at the Champions League group stages in 2003-04. They had three teams in the in the group stage.
In the group stage,
which was the same as Spain, same as England. And if a team was going to, if a Premier League team was going to Olympiacos or Panathinaikos, or to Besiktas or Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, etc., you knew they would have a really difficult game. You knew they would probably win the home game because the Greek and Turkish teams never seem to travel very well. But I remember Liverpool had a terribly tough game that night in the UEFA Cup. They lost in Champions League group stage against Olympiacos in the season they won it, 2004-05. I remember Liverpool going to Liverpool playing a European Cup semi-final away to Panathinaikos against Panathinaikos in '85, and Panathinaikos reaching their Champions League semi-final in Juventus. And that just feels, we've seen a lot of these leagues like the Dutch league, the Portuguese league, Belgian league, Turkish league, Greek league decline as there's been so much concentration of wealth and talent and power and revenue in the big, 5 leagues, but generally the Premier League and La Liga. I think it's really unhealthy for the rest of European football, and I think it's harsh that clubs like Rangers and Celtic and Olympiacos and Panathinaikos have to find it so difficult just to get into the Champions League as champions of their country. Yeah. But when I see Olympiacos failing to get past Maccabi Haifa and then finishing bottom of a Europa League group which has Karabag and
Freiburg and Nantes.
It feels like Greek football, probably because of its own dysfunction, has fallen far more than other leagues, and it's I'm glad the passion is still there, because I think the passion is probably the one thing that is really sustaining it right now. It's because the quality, sadly, is diminished probably more than it should have been.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, of course, though, it's important to mention that Olympiacos have made it out of a group stage in Europe 13 times out of their last 15 efforts. This is what happened at Olympiacos, in my opinion, this season in Europe is their worst European campaign I have ever seen.
Yeah.
But that is just an exception to the rule. And despite the Greek league's dysfunction, Olympiacos have been a mainstay in Europe. The thing is that the others have seriously struggled. Panathinaikos are but a shadow of their old self. They were also barred from Europe for 3 years, if I remember correctly, because of financial reasons. AEK, have always been quite a mediocre side in Europe. They've only won 1 Champions League game in their entire history, and they have the worst points record out of any Greek team, as they won 0. They lost all 6 of their group stage matches. PAOK never made it to the Champions League. And back then, when we got 3 teams through, that was, we have to admit it, that was mainly Panathinaikos, who were doing exceptionally well in the Champions League, making it to the semifinals, the quarterfinals, then the quarterfinals of the then UEFA Cup. But even back then, Greek football was very dysfunctional. We called that era the Paraga, which included a lot of dodgy refereeing, owners going crazy, a lot of underhanded tactics, a lot of bribing. So Greek football wasn't healthy. But what I'm trying to say is that there is still a way for Greek teams to thrive in Europe. Olympiacos have been doing it for the past 23 years. No, 13 years. Excuse me. And now Olympiacos basically need to find the kind of manager that are going to help help them regain their European status. And we've heard a lot of names.
Kostas, can I, before we go to the manager, I kind of want to touch on this a bit.
Sure.
Oliver, it's a really good point. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about this season as a Olympiacos fan, and where we were in 2019, 2020, pre-COVID. That was seen as one of the best Olympiacos teams in the history of the club.
The best, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if not for COVID, then the year we knocked out Arsenal, it was an amazing team. And if Jose Sa hadn't broke his hand in training, we probably go through against Wolves and go very close. I think that team could have gone all the way in the Europa League. And everyone thought, and we were on the back of a manager staying at Olympiacos for almost 3 years. That's unheard of, in the modern history. And then Martins, after COVID started going down, Olympiacos was meant to sell all those players from that team, like a Cisse, who was still there when you were there, Hussein
the Camaras.
They were meant to sell those players in the price range that I think other European leagues pre-COVID were paying, like 10 to 15 million euros. Like that's right there, and then the sweet spot for Olympiacos. And what we noticed after COVID, I think, was you had the Premier League teams paying the money, and then the rest of the leagues were going to free transfers or those 5 million under transfers. And so that payday and experience Olympiacos was looking for never came in 1920. And the team tried to fill the gaps with free transfers and shady loans and whatnot. And that what we thought was the start of a new Olympiacos with Martins, a new way of thinking, really came and crashed and burned down. And before Martins came in, Olympiacos looked a lot like it does right now. And so I think a lot of fans are questioning to themselves, well, was this Martins guy just a flash in the pan? You know, he came for 3 or 4 years and he was historic. He stayed at Olympiacos. He made the team play good football and he completed his circle. And now we're back to 2 to 3 managers a season. Who the hell knows what's going on? And you hear some of the names, which I know Costa is going to bring up and ask you a bit about. And it's just like failed Premier League managers or people who were probably looking at Olympiacos saying like, hey, if I get a few results in Europe, I may get the call from somewhere, you know, like that type of thing. Like Gattuso, I know, is a name on the list that he turned us down, I think, or something like that. So it's a weird spot. It's who is the club going to go to? Are they going to go to a well-known name? Or are they going to look again to the Portuguese or Spanish market in that mid to lower tier, who maybe a younger manager who thinks, okay, I can take Olympiacos and build something here. So yeah, no, it's a huge time. And again, we don't have, I think they're trying to bring in a new sporting director too. That's a big problem we've got. No one knows who's picking the coach. I think the owner and his son and maybe a few other people are selecting him. So it's really a question of how did we get there in 1920, even in such a, as we all know, a very mediocre league, and how can we get back to that? Or was that just a flash in the pan and we're not going to be seeing that anytime soon? So if that explains it a bit more detail.
Well, oh, sorry. Well, as Labro said, we've heard a lot of names this season. We do have a bit of a Chelsea and Tottenham thing going on. It all started with Gennaro Gattuso, who appeared to be very close to signing, but then the Olympiacos fans pulled off at Tottenham and went nuts on social media. And then all of a sudden, Gattuso was not so close anymore. Then we had Alfred Schroeder coming to Greece to discuss the position, and he seemed extremely close. Apparently, according to Greek media, we hit a snag because Olympiacos wanted him to take over now, and Schroeder obviously said, "No, I'm not taking over now because if I do, I'm not gonna look so great." So he flew back to the Netherlands. Then he was spotted in Bruges watching the game of his former team, and now he seems set to return to Bruges, where he had a lot of success. So now we've heard a bunch of names, and some of them are former Premier League managers that you're very, you know a lot about. Those are Bruno Lage, Jesse Marsch, Ralph Hassenhüttl, Javi Gracia, and Quique Flores. So I was thinking about going through one by one. Let's start with Bruno Lage, who won the Portuguese title with Benfica in 2019 before joining Wolves, where he played a 3-4-3 formation, continuing on from Nuno Espirito Santo, and did pretty well in his first season, even though he prefers a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1 formation. And he did well in his first season despite having a small squad. He was defensively sound, but lacked in attack, something that Olympiacos fans are not too keen on. And his game was mostly possession-based. What can you tell us about Bruno Lage, who, let's be honest though, has been linked with the Sporting Lisbon job in case Ruben Amorim leaves? And let's face it, we wouldn't be surprised if Amorim gets linked with Tottenham and Chelsea if Mauricio Pochettino doesn't take over there.
Yeah, you summed it up very well. The interesting thing is, I mean, he arrived at Wolves. Nuno Espirito Santo moved on from Wolves to Tottenham in the summer of 2021. There was great cynicism from people like me when they appointed yet another Portuguese coach, which was obviously, everyone thought, well, this is just Jorge Mendes picking another, just the foot client. This is predictable. Wolves, surely Wolves need to break away from this model. He looks like another puppet type thing. So a lot of cynicism, skepticism, and I thought he did really well last season. As you said, the football was quite defensive in some ways, but No, certainly no more than it had been previously under Nuno. It's a squad which had been built to kind of play very compact way. Apart from the two wide forwards, it was a squad built on strong defensive foundations. And I just had to look up to remind myself, they finished 10th, and look, there were a cluster of clubs in the middle: Leicester, Brighton, Wolves, Newcastle, Palace, all ending up within 4 points of each other. But I think Wolves going into the final few months of the season were almost like best of the rest in the Premier League. They were seventh, eighth a lot of the time, and looked like they were doing. I think a lot of people were quite impressed by Bruno Lage, and then they ended the season very poorly. A lot of the goals dried up, a lot of poor defensive performances. They lost at home to Leeds. I think I can't remember when they were 2-0 up, but it seemed like the rot set in a bit, and then they started this season poorly, and then I think people kind of retro judge it a bit and say, well, look, the signs were there last season, and then they moved him on, replaced him with Lopetegui, who has definitely brought more solidity and tactical discipline. I feel he did a good job, and is not somebody that you would think, well, he's a failed Premier League manager. Look, most people who manage in the Premier League, unless you're Pep Guardiola or Jurgen Klopp, you'll end up as a failed Premier League manager because you get sacked. And sometimes you get, a lot of the appointments are made with a very short term objective, and very often the managers succeed in the short term, steering a team clear of relegation or whatever, or having a good first season, and then they get sacked in the second season. That's kind of, I'm sure if we talk about some of these other managers, Javi Gracia, etc., it will be the same. So I felt like he did well. One thing I would say is, and look, it doesn't matter if you're winning games, but he didn't really kind of bring a great deal of personality or charisma to the club. I think if you're looking for somebody that you can really kind of rally around, an individual, which I think suits certain clubs, you need the manager to be a really sort of visible, strong, sort of almost populist leader. I don't think he's that. I think he's a good technical coach, and whether he would have the personality to be that guy in the eyes of the fans, or whether he would have the personality to be able to stand up and say no to Marinakis at times. I think that would be the question I would have with a lot of these coaches, really, because I think you probably have to have a special skill set to be able to survive under an owner like that.
Yeah, no, I wanted to. You mentioned the name Jorge Mendes, who we know very well. If you look at Olympiacos' past transfers, past managers, and a lot of the managers who are quite close to the club now have a thing in common. They're a former player who had Mendes as an agent, or they have Mendes as an agent right now as the manager. How big a role do you see that playing, with clubs selecting managers? Like, is this Mendes? I know is a different case, but at Olympiacos, it looks like we're very close to 2 to 3 agencies. Of course, this isn't written anywhere, but if you can read the tea leaves by going on Transfermarkt, you can read it. If you go in the newspaper and then go Transfermarkt, who's the agent of these people, it shows. For an owner like Marinakis, do you think this relationship with certain agents is kind of play a bigger role in the hunt for coaches?
Yeah, I think it does. Look, there's nothing corrupt or anything, anything like that. If it's simply a case of having a good relationship with the agent and having the good connection and having a network of people that you trust, if that's as far as it goes, then that's fine. That's normal. I was really surprised when Gattuso started being linked with Tottenham, and because I was aware he did well at Pisa, didn't he? Earlier in his career, he'd gone to Milan. Milan, Napoli. You could say, well, he did okay, but he wasn't necessarily the CV that would make you think. He didn't impress at Napoli as much as Sarri did or as Spalletti did. That's what I would say.
Yeah, especially the latter.
Yeah, exactly. But Sarri did a brilliant job as well. And of those three coaches, I think he's the probably the weak link. And you think Spalletti himself was available that summer when Tottenham were looking, going through this exhaustive managerial search and looking at Gattuso and looking at all these names which looked quite agent driven. And I think there's nothing wrong with being, having the connection with an agent where you can, where you can probably get yourself in a more favourable position to be recommended, a coach you might not otherwise get. But there has to be a bigger pool of talent that you're looking at beyond what a certain agent or two or three agents are offering. That's where I worry about a club. And I've said the same about Wolves. It's great having this access to the Gestes Foot, Jorge Mendes stable, but that can't just be your entire ethos. Cannot be built around this agent and agency, which it's linked to your Chinese ownership, which might be gone tomorrow. Who knows? It's an advantage if you're using it in an advantageous way. It's not good if it's part of your club's institutional way of doing things. That's where I worry. And look, there are a lot of bad agents out there who, if you were relying on a lesser agent or a less transparent agent or an agent who doesn't have such good players, then that's where it becomes really problematic. So, and I suppose in the case of Olympiacos, look, there are many clubs which Jorge Mendes has great relations with. He's one of the best agents in the world. So if you're Olympiacos, in the position, the sort of diminished position in terms of wealth and power that the Greek league has now, you're probably further down the food chain than the likes of Wolves and Atletico Madrid and so on. So there, that's where it becomes difficult.
Yeah, no,
it's more a pragmatic situation, and which is why Olympiacos are still targeting more pragmatic targets for the manager's position. And another one is, go ahead, Labro.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said, like the relationship with the agent, because Jorge Mendes has brought us, of course, Daniel Podence came to Olympiacos through Mendes, Jose Sa came there. But we also got a lot of really bad players, who also came, like Roderick Miranda. I think he played for Wolves as well. It was horrific. Like they almost tried to cancel the transfer a week after he arrived. And it also, you get the thing where Mendes says he'll come, but then you're going to have to sell him for this amount. And when I say he's gone, we're taking him and he leaves. And we saw that with Podence. We saw that with Sa too. Olympiacos in the end for, I think, the best goalkeeper we've ever seen. That Olympiacos left for like 12 million euros or some really low fee. So it has its pluses and has its down parts. And there's a few agencies. I know the name CAA, I think, is one of them. Is another big player with Olympiacos. They have a lot of clients coming in and out. And if you also look at some of the names, we're not going to ask you about, but Rebrov and I know Steve Cooper's a client of them as well. You sort of see a window as well. So I really enjoy this game of the tea leaves. Our fans know that I do a bit of this at work, so I quite like this sort of stuff. But Costa, go on with your other names.
Well, I mean, the next name is someone that I do want to hear Labros' opinion about it, because it's his compatriot, good old Jesse Marsch, absolutely well known from his time in the Premier League. Before joining, he had 2 straight Austrian Bundesliga titles with Red Bull Salzburg, a roller coaster stint at Leeds with extreme highs and extreme lows. He was tasked with the unenviable job of keeping Leeds in the Premier League last season after Marcelo Bielsa left. Barely managed to secure safety, as it happened on the last day. We saw some shocking defensive performances at times. He's trying various formations, but appears to prefer a 4-2-3-1, implementing a high press. At Salzburg, he concentrated on high press and winning the ball back. He likes to keep his players high on the pitch, and what he liked to do was to score goals by stealing the ball high up on the pitch and creating some dangerous counterattacks. What do you make of him, Ollie?
Yeah, I think he's the most divisive of the names that you mentioned, and I think he's probably the one who has, in some ways, the lowest reputation in the Premier League. Than Hassenhüttl, Gracia, Lage, etc. Because he was not popular with the Leeds fans. I think he probably outstayed his welcome in some ways before he was sacked. This season was really difficult. And of course, he took over from a guy, Marcelo Bielsa, who was totally adored by the Leeds fans. I don't feel Jesse Marsch got anything like enough praise for keeping Leeds up last season. I know they finished 17th. I think they were 17th when he took the job, or 17th, or roughly 17th. I don't think they were in the relegation zone.
They were on their way out. They were on their way out before Marsch joined.
They were exactly. They were dropping like a stone. I think they lost 6 games on the run. They conceded 4 against Manchester United, 6 against Liverpool, 4 against Tottenham. They looked in Bielsa's final games the way they looked in Marsch's final games. They looked like a relegation waiting to happen. And I found it really sad. And I think it probably just speaks of the Premier League and how you just cannot afford to get relegated because of the ridiculous financial precipice that you're on if you're at risk of relegation. I found it sad that they had to basically sack Bielsa in order to survive, because I think, look, please just give him the season. Let him try to keep you out, and let him be loved whatever happens. But you can't do that in the horrendous financially pressurized world of the Premier League. So I feel Leeds were going down, whether they were in the relegation at that point or not. He came in, I think, a difficult first few games, and then I think they won four of their remaining games. And looking at it, they beat Norwich, they beat Wolves, they beat Watford, they beat Brentford. They drew another 3 games. It was a really good run at a time when all the other teams who were at the bottom, Everton, Burnley as well, they were all improving form the way teams often do in the final weeks. So it was a really high bar from that point of view to come in and keep Leeds up, probably higher than anyone realised at the time. And he got over it, and they stayed up by 3 points by winning on the final day. I think it was really impressive. And the difficulty then is that obviously they saw Rafinha and Phillips in the summer, bought very, very young, raw-looking, talented but raw players in the summer. And I think he really struggled this season. After a good start, they had some good results early on, beating Chelsea, beating Liverpool, and then, the same problems that Bielsa had encountered, they set in again. So, if you were to judge him over the near 12 months he was at Leeds, you would say, well, it wasn't 12 months, was it, in the end? But the time he had at Leeds, he did well to keep them up, and then couldn't, like Frank Lampard at Everton, couldn't stop them slipping back down into the mire again. So, I think he showed enough quality to think that he's a good developer of talent. He has interesting ideas. He's energetic. I think if you looked at his final 4 or 5 games, you'd say, look, that team can't defend. That's totally disorganized. But that's very often the case when you look at somebody's last 5 or 6 games, isn't it? You should never judge a manager just on his last 5, 6, 10 games. Generally, that's when the rot has set in, and the manager is struggling. So I feel his work at Salzburg marked him out as a talent. His time at Leipzig was disappointing and short, and you thought, well, maybe he's not not quite as good as we thought he was. But then I was pleased that Leeds kind of ignored the Leipzig bit and appointed him on the basis of his work at Salzburg. It's quite often happens that you're only judged on your previous job or your previous 5-6 games. But I felt he justified his appointment in the short term at Leeds. I felt I could understand why when Southampton were looking at him, a lot of people laughed and said, "This is ridiculous. This guy's clueless." There's an anti-American culture, I think, when it comes to managers in England.
And sorry to interrupt you, but you hit the nail right in the head. There is an anti-American sentiment in England, and when he took over, it was around that time when that TV show Ted Lasso was doing great, and people were actually comparing him to Ted Lasso, which was extremely unfair because the only reason they compared him to Ted Lasso is because he was American and he was no Pep Guardiola. Exactly. And it was very unfair.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, look, Bob Bradley managed in the Premier League previously, and he really struggled at Swansea, and he found it tough. But it was, I think English fans, a certain type of English fan, finds it very offensive to hear Americans talking about soccer, and people need to get over that. It's you know, there's been a generation or 2 generations of really good American football players. There's now, I think, a generation of really decent coaches that are, you know, and if we're saying, oh, English coaches aren't good enough, English managers aren't good enough, with perhaps 1 or 2 exceptions, at least open your mind to what other countries have to offer. You can't just judge somebody by their passport or their accent or by their use of a certain terminology. Absolutely, it didn't end well. It didn't end well for Leeds, for Marsch at Leeds, but it generally doesn't end well for managers in the Premier League. They generally, if you do well in the short term, achieve your first objective, which in the case of Marsch at Leeds was just to keep them in the Premier League, then you've probably been a success.
Yeah. No, I have a few points as an American living here in Europe. Jesse Marsch, I'm surprised the U.S. men's national team hasn't just taken him as the manager.
Yeah.
I was just waiting for that to happen. I was in the States last month and for a bit of time, and I don't follow the MLS. I barely the national team is hard to follow with the hour change, but I was still I went to a Seattle Sounders game, and I was still so surprised at how low the level is. Almost like we were talking about Olympiacos is like on a downward trend in Greek football, but I still feel like when I watched an MLS game, it was just I don't know. It was very difficult to watch. Maybe that's a bias set in my head. But Jesse Marsch, the one concern I have is, as we've noted, it is, how do I put it bluntly, a mess in Greece. And he's worked in Northern Europe, in Austria and Germany, in England, which is quite more organized than what it is in Greece. And what is he going to find when he goes to Greece and he's seeing all of this stuff and he's hitting Google Translate on the Olympiacos website? Is he going to be freaking out a bit? I can imagine it as an American,
Yeah, he doesn't strike me as very Greek Super League.
Yeah.
In terms of his,
for me as well.
In terms of his sort of calm, not necessarily calm on the touchline.
No, I
agree.
agree.
But
his demeanor, and he's very friendly. I don't know.
Yeah, I think.
But Ernesto Valverde was very motionless. Or Ernesto Valverde is probably the most successful manager. He's definitely the most successful Olympiacos manager of this century, and he was very emotionless. He was very robotic in his demeanor. He was no way shouty, or same with Pedro Martins. They didn't engage with that.
Yeah, but maybe they were kind of, I mean, somebody like Rafa Benitez strikes me as somebody who would be, look, he'd be a dream appointment for somebody like Olympiacos, wouldn't he? But he always struck me as a very level-headed guy who would restore order in a chaotic situation. And I think there are coaches like that who would restore order in a chaotic situation, and there are guys who would find a chaotic situation totally alien to their football culture. And I think, MLS plus Red Bull Sports Empire is a really kind of, it's a very kind of almost collegiate sporting environment, isn't it? And I would say almost like a sanitized sporting environment. And you think going into that, obviously Leeds was a bit mad, but it's a lot more sensible club than it was a decade ago. And you think going from that into Olympiacos and Marinakis and all of that, that might be a bit of a culture shock.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's almost the other end. You think the Gattusos of the world will fall into the trap of the madness, they're going to be like, the referee, it's almost like you want someone who's just like...
He already did it. Gattuso already did it with Offi, and he went viral with that
exactly.
post-match rant.
Sometimes every good, whatever it was, So I think it would be... It's a balancing act, like you say. You want someone who can understand it. So, Costa, any other names we wanted to ask about?
The next one, in my opinion, you mentioned dream appointments, Oli, and I'm thinking out of my list, he's the closest we got, and that is none other than Ralph Hassenhüttl, who burst onto the scene by leading RB Leipzig to second place in the Bundesliga back in 2017, which was considered a miracle. That was before RB Leipzig became Bundesliga and Champions League mainstay. Successful 4 years at Southampton. I at least think they're successful. Whom at some point he led to fifth place and in the Premier League table. They even topped the table for a day, and that was their first time in the club's history. High pressing sort of football.
In the Premier League era,
Yes, in the Premier League era, of course. High pressing sort of football with a 4-2-2-2 formation that switches to a 4-4-2. He likes to play out from the back and is all about possession. He likes a slow build-up that really helped him at Southampton, score some major victories and some major goals. Doesn't like his players to create attacks from the wings, which is interesting. He doesn't like crosses, but instead prefers the ball to be played through from central positions. What do you make of him, Molly?
I like him. I like him a lot. I think of the names we've mentioned. I mean, look, I mentioned Rafa Benitez as a sort of dream appointment because from a Olympiacos point of view, but I don't really see that happening. Of the names you mentioned, I think Hassenhüttl, definitely. He came in. I think people, when they look at his record, and look, I'm just looking at it now. 16th, 11th, 15th, 15th in the Premier League. His win percentage wasn't high. It was, but when you consider that the Southampton that he walked into in 2018, I think, was very, very different. Very, very different to the Southampton that Pochettino walked into and that Koeman walked into and Puel walked into. By that time, the momentum and all the positivity around Southampton in the early years after promotion had gone. A lot of the good players had gone. They'd been replaced by inferior players. They had been, all that sort of very kind of, quite self-satisfied talk of the Southampton way, that had gone. The club seemed a bit broken, and they very, very narrowly avoided relegation the previous season when Mark Hughes had come in after Pellegrino. So he then, like we were saying with other managers, a manager keeps the team up, and then the same problems arise, as happened with Hughes, who was sacked fairly early the next season. Then Hassenhüttl came in, improved them, kept them up, but also, I think, significantly built on that survival operation. So he turned them into he sort of reintroduced. They were kind of in survival mode. They were in, let's just desperately avoid relegation mode. And then Hassenhüttl improved them and improved young players and brought back a sense of, look, this is what Southampton are. They became a team that scored goals again. They finished 11th in 2019-20, and they seem to be up on an upward trajectory again. And I think it was the only reason they didn't remain so was because they they stopped really investing well. They stopped recruiting well. I think you would say that the last 2 or 3 seasons, Hassenhüttl was their best asset. Really, it was nothing like the squads that had finished 6th and 7th under Pochettino and Koeman. I like the way they played, the sort of energetic, vertical football, quite narrow, fullbacks getting forward. I felt he did a good job at Southampton, and it felt that this season, new ownership, he was on borrowed time from the start. I always felt he was not going to last long in the season because I thought they were going to struggle, whoever was in charge. And I think new owners always want to appoint their own man. They did. Nathan Jones, it didn't go well.
Not at all.
Not at all. And I think it probably showed what Hassenhüttl had, that Hassenhüttl had probably been not performing below expectations with that team. I think, Southampton looked like getting relegated. I felt from the start of the season they would get relegated whether they stuck with Hassenhüttl or not. But I do feel that their best chance of staying up would have been if they'd stuck with him. I think he's a good coach. You could look at his final 7, 8, 9, 10 games, and you would say, well, look, it had gone, it had unravelled. They weren't defending well, they weren't scoring well. The team spirit had gone. That's maybe he'd run his course there, but I still think he was better than what had come later, and I think he's a really good coach. But again, I would have that question mark about, is he very Greek Super League? Would he be a bit shocked after Red Bull and the Premier League by what he would find in the Greek Super League and Olympiacos? I don't know. It's again a culture shock potentially, but I find it encouraging really that they're looking at that type of coach rather than the sort of faded, manager who's on the way downward trajectory looking for one last payday. I like the fact they're looking at Hassenhüttl.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, it's very important for Olympiacos fans to understand that when you take over a team like Southampton in the Premier League, your goal is to not be relegated. You cannot dream about the title. You cannot dream about a top 4. You cannot really dream about Europe. Maybe a dramatic push to the conference. Yeah, maybe you could dream of an Aston Villa-esque kind of push, a Brentford-esque kind of push, but the competition is so high there. I mean, Hassenhüttl is considered successful at Southampton, even though he lost 9-0, not once but twice, to Leicester and Man United. But yeah, he has done a great job at Southampton, in my opinion. I think you hit the nail right in the head. But before we move on, I would like to ask you, what do you consider a Greek Super League manager?
Yeah, I think somebody who's going to be. I think it probably has to be somebody who's quite streetwise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, this happened with Carlos Corberán as well. I think we both think he's very good manager, but he showed up like a bit blue, and he was rotating the lineup, trying things, lost 3 games in a row, and he was done. Like, I think he didn't realize how tight the leash is, right? It's and I think he may be one of these names that we're talking about in the Premier League very soon. But in Greece, he wasn't a Greek Super League manager, But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think somebody. I don't know. I think they need to be prepared for the chaos, whether it's dressing room, whether it's managing upwards into the boardroom, whether it's just trying to keep the fans calm. Sending out the right messages after a defeat or whatever. I mean, look, you wouldn't want the fans to be calm because it's it's Greece, but you don't want them going. You don't want people overreacting to every sort of ebb and flow of a team's. I think if somebody's kind of consistent and measured with their messaging about where the team's up to, and so I think that helps. And this is not particularly talking about Greek football culture. It's about there are certain clubs in England and in Scotland and in across Europe where you think the way you communicate with the fans at that club is really important. And I think Olympiacos is probably one of those clubs. But yeah, it's probably about being streetwise. And the thing I said about Benitez, being able to bring a sense of order into a club where things are perhaps a little chaotic, and where you might have a squad which has got. Look, the impression I got was that Olympiacos have, perhaps after years of having the best Greek players and then having big name players who were maybe on a downward trajectory, the impression I had was that Olympiacos seemed to be going into more of a kind of let's develop players, let's develop players to sell on, that kind of culture. But there has to be a patience that comes with that, because
we don't do patience here.
Yeah, but you've also got an owner who's throwing in James Rodriguez and Marcelo, who probably aren't really massively financially or emotionally invested in what they're doing there. And so from this sort of chaotic dressing room, you've got to try and, I don't know, press the right buttons with a quite disparate group of players and introduce and maintain a way of playing. I think it's really difficult.
Yeah.
It's not just about being a tactical trainer. You've got to manage upwards, manage downwards, manage outwards.
Yeah.
In a way that probably
point.
isn't the case at a lot of clubs across Europe.
Yeah. And I have one question stemming off of that. You guys have written quite a bit about Panathinaikos and the events that have been going on at Forest. I'm sure there's going to be a story about what went wrong at the end of the season if they get relegated. How damaged do you think is the Olympiacos brand and the Panathinaikos brand after this situation? Like, how hard will it be for the club to bring a manager in? Like, football is it's huge, but the people, the community isn't so big and people speak. Do you think this chaotic environment is something that a lot of people are going to say no to? Like, it's becoming very well known abroad.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily. I mean, I think
Me neither.
No, I think it's still. I mean, it's a big club. You get the chance to compete for a title, but with that is the expectation that you, and the demand from the owner, that you not just compete for the title, but that you win the title, that you never drop below first place. That's the difficult thing. I mean, look, Marinakis is clearly a very, very difficult guy to work for. I think, however long Steve Cooper remains in situ at Forest, I think when he comes out of there, whether it's sacked or whether it's moving on to another club, a more stable club, I think he'll probably come out with some horror stories about how hard it was. But I think it's outside of the big 5 leagues, outside the obvious places like Ajax, Benfica, Porto. It probably is a desirable job, and people will go there knowing they will probably get sacked, but sooner rather than later. But it's a job where you're probably well paid, and you're probably well paid if you get sacked. And the potential upside, if you're the manager who cracks it, like Pedro Martins did, is huge. You'll be a hero, and every manager fancies their ability to be the one who does better than all the guys who went before. Not necessarily just at Olympiacos, but managers generally, they generally back themselves to be able to do it. So I don't think, I don't imagine that they won't be fishing in the same pool as they were 15, 20 years ago. But at the same time, if you're, a manager who has a good reputation, who's worked in the Premier League, it's probably one of the few jobs that might entice you. I'm sure not all of those managers would fancy it, but some of them would.
Yeah. No, I think the best case scenario for a manager is like Marco Silva. He came here for a year.
Yeah.
He performed in the Champions League, I think he won the double. Maybe he only won the championship.
No, he won
And
the title. He lost the
he
cup.
lost the cup, and he left,
Right.
and his career has kind of skyrocketed.
Yeah.
So it's one of those where you think of it as like maybe working at one of these big companies where it's like, if you make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's so yeah, it's a good point.
Well, I mean, I wonder how the next one would do at Olympiacos. Javi Gracia, uneventful, dramatic ending for him at Leeds. He has experience in Greece, having coached Olympiacos, Volu, and Kerkira. Joined Watford, another club, another trigger-happy club. Nothing exceptional over there, I remember.
I think he was really good at Watford.
Oh.
Yeah, I would say he was the guy who, I think they've made a lot of bad appointments, Watford, particularly since him. I think he's the one guy who you could really think, well, they should definitely not have sacked him. That was look, he started one season poorly, and I think he was sacked after 4 games, 5 games, something like that. But he got them to the FA Cup final the year before. I think they'd finished, I don't know, they finished 10th or something like that the year before. I think he's another one, and I'd put Marco Silva in the same category, where people in England looked at it when he first got a job in the Premier League and thought, well, what's this guy done? They looked at his CV, and it was, he seemed to have managed everywhere: Spain, Russia, Greece, etc., and never really done a great deal that would make you think, wow, this guy is good. But I think he looked good at Watford, and I think that they, if you look at how the wheels have come off at that club the last 4 years, since that FA Cup final, I think if they could change one thing, it would be that they shouldn't have sacked Gracia. He's the one manager who I think looked like he might even get to stay at Watford beyond the first 18 months. He's by far the longest serving of Watford's managers over the Pozzo era. Good. I mean, I would say in terms of style, not the classical Spanish style, more of an Emery sort of compact, deeper defensive line approach than a Guardiola or a Guardiola inspired coach. But yeah, I think he was managing Watford at the time and managing a struggling Leeds team at the time. Does the Leeds experience count against him? I think it was 3 wins in 12 games. Well, that might be better than others would have managed in the same circumstances. It feels like Leeds is a bit broken, and he went in there, initial uplift and then regression. Didn't really have long enough to leave a lasting impression there. But he, I think he's good as well. But he's a very different style of football than for example, Hassenhüttl. So I think he, and I could imagine, having managed in Greece before, managed in Russia, and managed in various clubs in Spain at various levels, maybe he's a bit more streetwise than some of the other coaches we mentioned. So yeah, I think he's got a respectable record.
And last but certainly not least, we got Quique Flores, another former Watford manager. He won the Europa League and UEFA Super Cup in 2010 with Atletico Madrid. Preferred a 4-2-3-1 formation that changed to a 4-4-2 at Watford, but their game became very predictable. Team wasn't compact, and that created open spaces in defense. How do you remember Flores?
Um, quite fondly in terms of his initial spell at Watford, and look, going further back,
Two
I mean,
stints,
he won the
yeah.
cup. He won the cup with Benfica. He then went to Atletico Madrid. I remember reporting on that Europa League run where they beat Liverpool and beat Fulham in the final. And look, he was being talked about a lot as, look, this guy is the next, the next big thing in coaching circles. This guy's going to come in, coming into the frame for big jobs. And then they had a difficult second season, I think. And then the next thing you knew, he was working in the UAE and then in the UAE, and then resurfaced at Getafe briefly, and then at Watford. I thought he did quite well at Watford, to the point where when he was sacked at the end of his first season, I think people thought that's not really very fair. That's not, he's onto a good thing. Why would you ditch him after a first season? But yeah, his second season at Watford. In fact, his subsequent career, I mean, he's sort of looking Espanyol, then in China with Shanghai Shenhua, then back to Watford, which just didn't work out. He arrived in September and was gone by December, and then a reasonable spell back at Getafe, but sacked again. He's clearly got some ability and some talent. More in that sort of. Again, more in that sort of Javi Gracia mould than a more sort of progressive possession-based coach. But again, maybe that to an extent reflects the jobs he's had at smaller, struggling clubs. But yeah, I think even when he was at Atletico, I think he favoured a fairly sort of pragmatic, defensive-ish formation and approach. So I think he's a good coach, but yeah, it's clearly a very different in outlook and style to a Jesse Marsch or a Ralph Hassenhüttl. So really, I think you shouldn't have the same guys on the same shortlist. Either you're looking for that type of coach or this type of coach, and which is it, or are you just looking for a big name who's out of work? It very often happens with clubs, and not just in Greece, but in the Premier League, where they'll a club will be looking for or a club will flip. In the case of Leeds, will go from a Bielsa to a Jesse Marsch to a Javi Gracia to Sam Allardyce in 12 months. It's very often people just appoint based on what's available and what the immediate needs are, rather than on the sort of long-term values and strategy that they might have had before.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, I mean, I've said it to the boys before. It's any sort of transfer talk. Any sort of transfer talk before the manager is appointed to me is always redundant, because one manager wants one thing, another manager wants another thing. They have different mentalities. I mean, Oliver, I mean, you have been amazing. I mean, we're almost an hour and a half in, and you've answered all of our questions. I have one last question before I give the floor to Labro, which I forgot to ask you. Would you say Jesse Marsch played any role whatsoever, 1%, in Erling Haaland's development at Salzburg? Any sort of role?
I've heard various coaches talking about their role in his development, and most of them really kind of play it down and just say, look, this guy was whether it's scouts or coaches, they play it down. They say, well, this guy was clearly a phenomenon at the age of 15, 16, and was always going to be, an incredible player and a phenomenon. But I think when you look at the move he made, aged, what was it, 18 when he left Norway, or maybe not, but when he left Norway and went to Salzburg, not every coach would have wanted to play him straight away. Maybe it was a more of a strategic Red Bull kind of decision, but you don't have to show as much faith in a teenage centre forward. I think just playing him at that point, I think it was a great move for him to go. I mean, the incremental steps he's made in his career, from going to Norway to Austria to Dortmund, a top German team, and now into the most dominant team in the Premier League. It's just been perfect, hasn't it? The progression. And I've spoken to a few people who have said, well, should Manchester United, given that they'd just appointed Solskjaer, who knew him at that point, they were at his former club, Molde. I think the appointment of Solskjaer came like a couple of days after Haaland had agreed to move to Salzburg. I think that's right. Had he gone to Manchester United at that point, at 18 or whatever, he might have drowned in what was in what Manchester United were at that time. Would he have got? Would a leading Premier League club, with all the expectation and demands and pressure, would they have been able to give him the room to develop the way he had at Salzburg? I suspect not. So I think that move was perfect for him. I'm guessing he would have made it, whether it had been Jesse Marsch or Ted Lasso in charge. But I'm sure he learned something good for under Jesse Marsch. I think that Salzburg team, I remember watching them at Anfield in the Champions League, that group stage that season. They were really good, and Minamino and others. It was a good team and playing really bold football. And I'm sure if they'd been playing boring, defensive, pragmatic football, Haaland wouldn't have progressed at quite the same rate, or his goal scoring rate might not have done. But I think he would have made it regardless.
Yeah. Labro, do you have any follow-ups?
No, I think that's it, Oliver. We hope you enjoyed the time at the game, and
definitely.
Thank you for spending time talking with us, because as you can see, it's a bit crazy. Olympiacos, it's
insane right now.
It's a bit crazy, and there's a lot of stories that we hear, and that we try to share as much as we can, but it's something else. It's something else.
Yeah. Like I was saying at the start it's we always think that, as well as the quality and the strength of the Premier League and the tradition of it, that as journalists we often feel like the sort of soap opera of the Premier League, the various characters and the managers and the some of the controversies and so on, that they somehow enhance the whole Premier League story from a media point of view. But compared to the Greek Super League, it's like I don't know if this reference will mean anything to people, but it's like, makes the Premier League look like the Archers, which is this sort of very traditional BBC Radio 4 soap opera where I think nothing happens, set in a village. I've never listened to it. It's probably listened to by the type of people who are avidly watching the coronation right now as I'm talking about Olympiacos. But it makes the Premier League look very sedate, very sanitized, and I'm obviously including the atmosphere in that, the match day atmosphere, because if any English football fans who are fancy, I know some people like going to Spain or to Germany to watch a match and sit in the stands there and have a beer and savor a different type of atmosphere, make a city break of it. Go to Athens, go to one of these games, or go to Salonika, where I've seen the Ring of Fire. It's just, I think Greek football is just so mad and clearly such an experience, and I will be following what happens in this latest derby.
Yeah, Hopefully,
Absolutely.
let's see if it's played first. But yeah, hopefully,
Yeah.
for me, if Panathinaikos loses the championship, it's the best case scenario. So hopefully we can help them with that, So yeah.
Ollie, thank you so much for joining us, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to be bringing you a lot of other important and interesting interviews for the channel. Lots of important stats and graphs. Thank you so much for the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can follow Ollie at Oliver K. What other social media channels do you have, Ollie?
Well, I have an Instagram which is Oliver K1 at Oliver K1, which has some great pictures from my time in Greece.
Excellent.
Not many pictures from the subsequent 2 months, so they'll be nice and near the top. And of course, you can subscribe to the Athletic and read the article about the derby in our Derby Days series, which I'll happily post a link on the on Twitter.
Please do.
And there's also been some great coverage of Marinakis, almost from a Forest perspective as well. I think it's definitely the most in-depth and insightful pieces that I've read on Marinakis, and he's an interesting guy.
Yeah.
Let's put it diplomatically.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Oliver. Guys, we'll see you next time.